This video is not a review of this feminist movie. We have had feminist movies in the stratosphere for decades and decades by now. A few years ago, it was The Woman King and Wonder Woman. Before that, it was Alien and Mad Max. I mean, the list goes on and on. The one thing about those movies is the influence they have on women's delusion of reality, specifically being equal to men. They will never be equal because we're just naturally different. Men will always be more domineering because we're physically the stronger gender. Women can never band together and overthrow the patriarchy physically. They'll lose every time. The rights women have are the rights men gave to them to protect them against other men. To think otherwise is to think backwards, but our society in the United States seems to want to live backward and out of order at the moment. Biblical principles and the order of man, women, and child are just not honored these days. But let's watch these videos and get some reinforcement of these points I'm making.
I mean, doesn't the Quran say that men have authority over women?
Well, don't they? I mean, according to your own narrative, men have been running the show. The feminists are asking for their so-called rights from who exactly? Okay, if you didn't have what you call patriarchy, then what you would have is a hell on earth for women. Because clearly, women do not have the power to coerce men, to force men, to make men deal with them this way or that way. If you're out somewhere and a man starts to chat you up and you don't want to be chatted up, what do? You tell him, I have a boyfriend, I'm married, and he goes away. You have to conjure up an imaginary man to get him to back off, because 9 times out of 10, only a man can keep another man in check, because men are inherently more dangerous than women. Instead of patriarchy, replace that word with bodyguard. What makes more sense? For you to be my bodyguard or for me to be your bodyguard? Who do you think is more capable of protecting who? From who? If men didn't protect women, who would? Why, men would do whatever they wanted. And isn't your bodyguard responsible for you? Shouldn't you listen to him if he says, for example, don't go here, don't go there, or let's take this route instead of that route because it's safer? Isn't that authority?
Yeah.
But he's doing it for you. Would you feel resentment about that authority? That's irrational. Look, you cannot dismiss the importance of physicality, human physicality. We're physical beings. Technology does not level the field the way you think it does. And if you were walking in the street by yourself late at night and you see a man coming towards you, which one of the two of you is more likely to be afraid? Who's going to be scared of who?
Me.
But see, you in the West have confused this. The feminists have confused this. The power imbalance. That literal physical power imbalance. That imbalance in the ability to coerce and exert force and to be violent. It's just a fact and a reality of the power imbalance between men and women. But your culture is in love with power. It's in love with force. It's in love with violence. So to you, whoever has the greater capacity for violence, whoever has the greater capacity for being dangerous, then that person is better. The one who can exert his will is better. Whoever has the power to force people to do something is better. And whoever is weaker is less. It's because you admire power so much, and you admire force, and you admire the ability to coerce, that you find yourself resenting that men have authority over women, or the idea, the concept of men having authority over women, because you think it's unfair. You think that women are being deprived. But remove that authority and see how deprived you'll be. Remove that authority and you will be in danger. You will be deprived of your safety. You'll be deprived of your security, your freedom, and maybe your life. You invent a concept, this concept of equality, and treat it as sacred, and you believe in it religiously, with religious devotion, and you demand that everyone believes in it, and no one can dare doubt the reality and the holy truth of the concept of equality. even though all evidence that you are exposed to on a daily basis disproves that concept. So you'll make fun of us and you'll look down on us and you'll insult our intelligence for believing in something that you say we don't have any proof for. Meanwhile, you're believing in something for which all of the proof that exists disproves it. You see how incoherent your thinking process is?
Big up to that content creator for reposting that video, and kudos to the man dropping jewels as well. The Muslim culture is way closer to biblical principles than the so-called followers of Yeshua in this country. They understand the roles God made for us. Consider this. Women have breasts to feed babies, but since we drink calves' milk and feed it to our offspring, we overlook the purpose of why God created us as man and woman. Father and mother, husband and wife. Naturally, there was a rebuttal, but it merely showcases delusion at its finest. I can't recall a time in history when all women went to war while men stayed back to protect the kids. Some women tell each other lies about men not protecting them throughout history, but that's contradicted by the undeniable fact that wars have always been fought between men for resources women benefit from after the war is over. Yet here we have a woman who doesn't believe this. It's simply comedy at best. She must be trolling.
Please do not be dismayed. You did not miss anything. He did not drop any gold nuggets or truth bombs. But the issue that patriarchy has is that it genuinely teaches the masses that men created the system, that men nurtured the system, and that without men, you have a system that is unsafe for, women and children, right? Because men have to protect children and women from men who do things to children, and it's all over the place. But the other thing is that it teaches us that at no point in history were women ever in control or ever an actual asset to the community, right? They were never able to fend for themselves. They were never able to, feed themselves or protect themselves. So they need men to be able to do that, right? There's this maternalist theory around women having always been nurturers and, giving birth and staying in huts so that men could go hunt for them and protect them. But then you have this issue. When anthropology and sociology started discovering that most of this stuff is trained thought processes, that is where the issue becomes much larger than what we expected. Because once you start finding out that women hunted, that women gathered, that women literally led society and civilization out of barbarism based on these nurturing roles, then you have an issue, because now you have women able to think in the capacity of understanding that women can lead, that women can protect themselves, because these are socially trained ideas again. But the other part being, especially when it talks, when we talk about patriarchy and paternalism and, this meritocracy myth that I'm so glad is starting to come up in conversation, there's another thing that's happening. Because, of course, when we begin to have these conversations and women begin to realize that they actually contributed to society in a large way, now you have to start coming out of that Neolithic era. Now you have to start acknowledging that the reason the mortality rate isn't the way it was in those times that they are trying so desperately to get us back to is because of the contributions of women. But the other thing being that, if you notice, men want women to be locked into roles that they feel are very, very barbaric. And they feel like it's barbaric for them because they don't hunt, they don't gather, they don't build, they don't do any of these things that they say men traditionally did or biologically do. But they want women to be locked into those same roles. They want women to still live in a Neolithic era, but they don't. And they can fully accept that industrialization took them out of those heavy, hard-working tasks and placed them into much softer, easier jobs. But they don't want women to have it easier. But don't take my word for it. If this makes sense to you, run to your local library as quick as possible.
So now women don't have it easier, but men do. Let's take a look at the household, where the majority of items were made to make women's lives easier. Consider all the kitchen utensils, from the stove to the microwave, dishwasher, and blender. These items were invented to simplify women's lives in the kitchen. What about the washing machine and dryer, as women were traditionally the cleaners, right? Then there are the vacuum cleaner and carpet cleaner, along with remote controls and TV dinners. Women aren't living in the Neolithic age as she believes. Let's conclude by doubling down on my initial point. This is definitely a reality check for women.
Okay, so if that's true, if men are the enforcement mechanism, why does that then mean that women's equality is a bad idea?
Well, I didn't say it was a bad idea. I mean, it is, but what my position is that it's laughable that egalitarianism is even possible, because women have no way to enforce their rights. They have to use men to enforce their rights. So since they have to use men to enforce their rights, they don't really have any rights, because all the rights come from men.
But why does the notion of egalitarianism have to be predicated on physical strength, or like who gets to enforce it?
Well, what else could it be predicated on?
Principles of like what's best for society.
And what happens if somebody violates those principles?
Equal,
Sure.
Like, why would it be based off the enforcement?
What happens if somebody violates those principles?
What do you mean?
Well, so if you have a society in which you have laws and government and things like this, and whatever social contracts you come up with, what happens if one side violates those principles, or a person or an individual or a group violates those principles? What would you do with them? You would, well, I would think arrest them maybe, or punish them, or do something punitive, or put them in prison or something like that. And so you're right back to the enforcement mechanism again. So there's really no way around it. The enforcement mechanism is from men, will always be from men. And so it's paradoxical to say that women can have equal rights, because even if they do have equal rights, it's just because men have allowed them to.
But does that make women's equality laughable, or like an absurd idea?
Well, it's paradoxical on its face, so it has to be laughable, because there is never going to be such thing as women's equality. Just an illusion thereof, because if it's decided by even a small majority of men, minority majority being like 10, 15, 20%, they just won't have it anymore, and there's nothing they can do about it. So essentially, always they have to defer to men for this.
Sure, your entire neighborhood one day can just decide, we hate Andrew, he's annoying, he's not mowing his lawn, let's go kill him. Does that mean your rights are laughable?
Not if they were women.
Overpowered by a large
Not if they were women. They could do that if they were men, though. I agree. I would agree that men could
I'm
likely...
pretty sure 20 women could come and just decide, we're going to overtake Andrew because he's not mowing his lawn.
I think it would be far more difficult for them to enforce it than 20 men. Wouldn't you agree? And I think that they would probably appeal to men in order to exercise the enforcement, which is what they do right now, which is what women do right now. They appeal to men to exercise all enforcement of all of their rights and all of the things that they want. They can't appeal to women because women can't enforce their rights and never have been able to.